So today we're going to be talking about the fall of the Roaring '20s, or more relevant, how a tiny little recession, well not tiny, but a recession turned into the biggest crisis in American history financially. So a little just quick background, 1929, stock market crashes, everyone kind of is like, oh, but then in the months following is when you get the ultimate panic. And then the way our lesson is going to be taught today is it's questioning, if you guys read, hopefully. We're doing questioning for the teaching style, so we're going to do about a quick 10-15 minute PowerPoint just to kind of refresh everyone, / if you didn't read, we're going to be your Lord and Savior. And then we're going to, after that, do a little Socratic seminar where we're all just going to get in a nice little circle and chat about some stuff for a bit. So hopefully you guys are ready to talk.
So the first kind of thing that happened that kind of caused the Great Depression was the stock market crash on Tuesday, October 24th, 1929. So what happened was like a whole bunch of calls came in, or they wanted to have the stocks paid, and people didn't have the money because they used credit like crazy. So everything just went to crap. So about $10 billion was lost that day. That's $100 billion in today's money.
The second thing that kind of happened as a result was the bank bust. Everyone, all of a sudden, it was about 3 months after the stock market crash is when people started, oh, I don't know if I trust the system anymore. I want my money where I can see it. Well, I'm sure most of you know the way the banking system works is there's only about 40% of the money is actually still there in physical form. Well, when everyone went to go try to take their withdrawals, gonzo. No money, no credit, and bam, shut down. And this happened to about it was rough estimates, just over 9,000 banks in 3 years closed because of this practice. And one of the crazy things was that it was a phenomenon where back in that day, you think about the communication ability and how people found out about stuff. Today, you just go on the internet, find out about banks, stocks, everything. But back then, you kind of had to take the word of people. Well, at this time, most people were kind of skeptical on what the businessmen, bankers wanted to tell you. So the result of that was they kept on saying, do not do this, because they knew very well what would happen if it happened. Well, no one trusted them, so everyone just kind of went in, took their money out, and bailed out the banks. And what this caused was what's called a money multiplier. If you read, you should know it's when a bank lends out money, they ended up expanding it in different directions. So you have, say someone gets a loan for a house, well then that money goes to construction, interior, all the contractors, movers, and then that money just expands out. Well, when the banks have zero money to lend out because no money's going in, you end up cutting the money supply drastically. And at the time, the Fed really had, the Fed was kind of bogus at this time. They really weren't doing anything. And so as a result, you have almost no money in the economy, which means that you're going to fail. And it's going to go from just a market recession to an all-out, everyone's broke as hell.
All right, so kind of at the same time that the banks are failing, the stock market is crashing, President Hoover is kind of sitting in his office, kind of crapping his pants a little bit, because he was like everybody else. He thought that this little itty-bitty recession was going to go away like the rest of them have in the past. But now that it hasn't, he's sitting in his office. He needs to figure out ways to bring money back into the American economy. And what he thought, or right here are what he thought would be the solutions to these big problems. And the first one came in 1930, and that is the SmootHawley Tariff. This was originally a campaign promise from him And basically what it was saying was he wanted to higher taxes on imported goods. And to do this, the reason he wanted to do this was to protect U.S. industries. Like we talked about how farmers were struggling heavily over the last couple decades, and what he wanted to do was make sure that they were able to recuperate a little bit more instead of having that foreign competition. But also he wanted to get people buying more American-made products rather than these foreign-made products. But what happened was he ended up creating the highest tariff in American history. And because of this, all of our foreign trading partners were like, we're not going to let you raise taxes on us, we're going to raise taxes on you as well. And because of this, people had to pay a lot more for imported goods. And because of this, American exports fell 78%. And then international trade market dropped from 36 billion to 12 billion from 1929 to 1932. And then a couple of years later, he came out with the 1932 tax increase. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that once we get down to our vocab terms. So just keep going because I'll get to that later.
So one of the big things that makes sense when you're talking about the economy crash, the recession, is you have to understand the business cycle. It's just a slowly growing, swooping trend. You have your economic growth, which is the little dash line. And the big thing to understand is the peak and trough system. Peak is when you have some more? No. Oh. Peaks are what people would call the expansionary times, when the economy is good, products are selling, the stock market's doing great. And then the trough is when you have your recessions. And most of the time, those troughs they look just like that. You know, you experience a bad time, but you go right back up. And one of the big reasons that this depression happened was because all the administration, all the government agencies figured, oh, this is just another quick trough. It's gonna skyrocket back, no problem. And, you know, as we all know, that's not exactly what happened at all.
So then another thing that kind of about the economy that works, or that affected it, was the GDP, which is the gross domestic product, which takes into account the services and goods that are produced in the country. And it's based on the market value, which is what these goods and services are purchased at. And then the other one thing that happened was the Great Contraction, which this is when the banks started failing because people kept taking the money out, and the Federal Reserve was not reimbursing them or helping them out in any way. So banks were just failing, and people really were scared of that. So they weren't putting money into banks, so they were just keeping it for themselves. So there was no money going into the economy at all.
All right, and here's where I'm going to get to that 1932 tax increase. But first of all, we're going to talk about what fiscal policy is, and that is the means by which a government adjusted spending levels and tax rates to monitor and influence a nation's economy. And so in 1932, President Hoover increased taxes on everybody, and the reason why he did this was to try and balance out the budget a little bit. But what he ended up doing was doing pretty much the opposite and made it completely worse. And so what this tax cut did, or this tax raise did, was it cut household incomes. And so now these homes don't have enough money to go out and do what they would like to do, spend it on cars, radios, all that kind of stuff. And they're keeping it for themselves or spending on things they actually need. And this fiscal policy also goes hand in hand with the monetary policy. And monetary policy is a process by which the authority of a country controls its supply of money. So this deals with interest rates and then the cost of credit, which we learned was a huge form of how people were buying things back in this time, but also the stock prices and the currency exchange. And this relates to the bank busting, as they were trying to figure out how to allocate their money, where to put their money. The Federal Reserve was really mishandling this money, and this was what led to the poor using of their monetary policy during this time.
So, like I talked about earlier, you have the multiplier effect. It's the result of putting your money in a bank lends it out, and then just expands. And this is how today still our economy just grows. You have to keep expanding the money supply. Well, the Federal Reserve, at the time was not bailing out banks. They were not giving out any loans at all because it was that style of politics at the time, and they just figured, oh, we'll weed out the weak banks, let them fail, strong ones, well, even strong ones failed. And this is a huge part of what caused a major depression, is there just was no money in the economy at all.
All right, so now we're going to do our Socratic seminar. So what we're going to do is kind of in this big area, we're going to push these desks back, everybody bring their chair, and we're going to circle up and do a little kumbaya session and talk about this. So we get a little bit of help in